If you were with us last week, we began a new series, what we're calling Love, Sex, and Marriage. And the series is based on an Old Testament book called the Song of Solomon. It's a book written by King Solomon about 1000 BC or about 3,000 years ago. And really it's a love story. It's his own love story that he tells about meeting this Shulamite woman. And the story follows them from their initial attraction to one another through their dating period, to their wedding night, through their first fight, and eventually on into their deepening commitment to one another as they continue on in marriage. And last week we began with the idea of attraction. We talked about attraction, and we said that attraction is good, that God wired us to be attracted to certain things in other people. But we need to be aware of what we're being attracted to, because what we're attracted to is probably going to eventually be our future spouse if we're not currently married. And we said that we could be attracted to the wrong things, but the good news is that we can train ourselves to be attracted to the right things. Not just the external, but also the internal. We talked about training ourselves to be attracted, like this couple was, to godly character, godly conviction, and godly encouragement. If you missed last week and you'd like to catch up, all of these messages will be on our website, and so let me encourage you there. But one Newday couple was so moved by the kickoff of our series that they went out into a field to make their own love, sex, and marriage memories. And they actually sent me a picture. Would you like to see the picture? All right, here we go. There you go. Isn't that nice? That's beautiful. That's inspiring to me. That would happen that Sabbath afternoon. Boom. That's very nice. Thank you for sharing that. All right, I'm going to go back to that one. If you're going to be with us next week, let me encourage you to be with us next week. We are going to actually be with this couple on their wedding night. It's going to be PG-13. And so we will have an alternate service next week for our kids, 5 to 12. Of course, our nursery is available for birth to 4. 5 to 12 will be available next week just during our sermon portion. And so you might want to be praying about that. Should my child be here? Shouldn't they be here? You know, what you can figure that out. But today we're going to move to the topic of dating. Now, if you at all pay attention to what's happening in our world, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. I know I watched a lot of news channels this week, and you know, you've got millions of refugees in the Middle East being pushed out by ISIS out of Syria and Libya, and just the incredible humanitarian devastation going on there. We've got this world economy that's kind of on a brink of something, but something not good. A lot of things happening in our world economy. Here at home, there's all kinds of tensions in our country. We have the Pope that's coming, and he's like addressing Congress and our president and everything, and to many, that's just like the fulfillment of prophecy. And so you look at kind of where our world is right now, and you're like, why in the world are we talking about dating? I mean, aren't there more weighty things that we should be talking about? And I know also for a lot of married couples, you're like, why are we talking about dating? Isn't like most of our church married already? I mean, don't we have this figured out? But let me just say that as a pastor, that I have probably not seen another issue that causes people heartache, heartbreak, messing up their lives, wrecking their faith than over the issue of dating. This is just something that we have not figured out as Christians. The reality is that the world changed the rules on dating about 50 years ago, and nobody's talking about it. We just kind of have gone along with it. And we do things the way everyone else around us in our culture does it, and therefore we get the same results that everyone else in our culture gets. The world has been writing the script for what dating and romance should be, and we've bought in. So we date like it's some kind of a recreational sport. How many people can I go out with? And then we get emotionally attached to people. We get emotionally wrapped up with somebody, and then naturally things get very physical, and we get physically involved with somebody. You describe, I mean, how far does that mean? I don't know, but we get physically involved, and then we begin to lose interest, or they begin to lose interest, and then there's a breakup, and then there's just heartbreak, and there is grief, and there's soul attachments because of the physical stuff that's happened, and part of me is on you forever, and a part of you is on me forever, and we're trying to figure that out, and I'm watching you now with somebody else, pretending like you never even knew me, and just the pain and the devastation that happens there, and all of this is in high school. And as a result, most kids are graduating from high school having gone through the emotional trauma of 2 or 3 divorces. we experience the wounds, and we experience the emotional scars, and we experience just the heartbreak. And God never intended for any of us to experience that ever. I mean, could there possibly be a way to approach dating and romance in a way that we would never have to experience heartbreak or a breakup? I believe it's possible. I believe it's possible. You know, most know that their faith in Jesus should have something to say about their romantic life. I mean, God has something to say about my finances and what I watch maybe, or the way I live. So certainly God would have something to say about my dating life. And the church kind of has talked about it, or Christians talk about it, and there's this whole scope of approaches to dating. And if you doubt it, just Google Christian dating books and look at all of the books that there are out there on the topic. Lots and lots of different books. But you have, the one approach that would just say, just date as many people as you want, just don't have sex. Just, have fun, go out, stay out, whatever, just don't have sex. But if you do have sex, that's a bummer, and but just say you're sorry to God and he's going to forgive you, and don't worry, just move on from that. There's that approach. And then there's the other approach on the polar opposite end that, approaches to dating that would have so many rules and just so many regulations that you can't even talk to a person of the opposite sex or look at a person from the opposite sex. And then, of course, there's everything in between. But I believe that a godly approach to dating isn't like a compromise between these two polar extremes of like just doing it just like the world without sex, or doing it like so regulated that you can't even talk to a person. I don't think it's about finding a middle ground. I believe that a godly approach to dating is about following Jesus. All of our lives should be about pursuing Jesus, if I'm a passionate follower of Christ. And that includes in my dating life. And so I want to talk about pursuing Jesus in the area of dating. And let me just confess up front that I have zero credibility in this topic. I'm going to be asking you to do something, single people, that I have never done. Because I have never been simultaneously a follower of Jesus and single. I became a Christian 1 year into marriage, so I don't know what it's like to date as a Christian person. And so I'm going to be asking you to do something that I have not done. I don't even know if I could. I think I could by the power of Jesus. Yes, I certainly could. But so just, if you want to write me off right now because I have no credibility, I understand. But I want to urge you to consider approaching dating in a way that could lead to deep love, to lasting romance, to allow God to write your love story in a way that is, I believe, deeply beautiful. And so while I've never dated as a Christian, over 20 years of ministry, I've counseled lots of couples. And I've watched couples do it beautifully and do it right and end up in a really good place. I've watched couples do it the wrong way and end up in a bad place. I've watched couples do it wrong and end up in a good place. But I've learned a lot about dating and relationships. I've also listened to and read and learned from a lot of godly single people who are applying these beautiful principles in their lives today. And so if you're willing, just let's kind of jump in. And I'm going to say lots of stuff that, everyone will leave here today disagreeing with something I say. Okay, so let's just get that out. You're going to be like, what is he saying? Is he serious? But here we go. All right, last week we met our couple, Solomon and the Shulamite woman. Today we look at their relationship between the time when they were initially attracted to each other and the time when they got married. We're going to call that the dating period. All right, this is where they are now in chapter 2 of Song of Solomon. We'll jump right in verse 8. This is the woman now speaking. She says, "Listen, my lover, look, here he comes, leaping across the mountains, bounding over the hills." Isn't that just beautiful? Young love. It's like, what? He bounding over the hills is like a little deep there, a little sappy. But what we're going to see is that they haven't seen each other probably in a long time. Last time we saw them, it was summer. She was upset because, she had been dark-skinned. But now we're going to see it's spring, and they probably haven't seen each other all winter. So it's the first time they're seeing each other, and it's like, oh, running across the fields. Oh, I'm so excited to see you. Look, there he stands behind my lover is like a gazelle or a young stag. Oh, that's beautiful. Look, there he stands behind our wall, gazing through the windows, peering through the lattice. He's looking for her. He's found her. They're playing this little game of hide and seek. She goes on, and she says, "My lover spoke and said to me." Now, she's quoting what he is saying to her. So he's talking now. "Arise, my darling, my beautiful one, and come with me. See, the winter is past, the rains are over and gone. Flowers appear on the earth. The season of singing has come. The cooing of doves is heard in our land. The fig tree forms its early fruit. The blossoming vines spread their fragrance. Isn't that just beautiful? I guess it depends on where you are relationally right now. If you're like young in love right now, you're just like, oh, that's so beautiful. And if you're anywhere else, you're like, that is so sappy. I mean, that's just like, so really? I mean, people like that kind of stuff, but it really is a beautiful description of spring. That spring has come, and he's talking about the fact that spring has come, and we see this description that everything is kind of working out in its proper timing. That's what he's talking about. He's saying the rains are past, flowers appear, birds are migrating and cooing and singing, early fruit is forming, vines are blossoming. These are all things that would happen at their appointed time in the spring. And they knew their time. These things knew their time, and they kept their time like clockwork. And the same is true for a budding relationship. There is a time to proceed in relationship as slow as a snail. And there is a time in relationship where it's time to say, you know what, let's step this up. Let's begin to date and see whether we are a match for one another in our lives. And this is what I believe this young man is saying. He's saying it's spring. Everything is doing its job right on time. And now is a time for us to spend some time together and deepen our relationship. And so a question for single people. How do we know when it's spring and when it's time to date and when it's winter? How do we know when it's time to date? And for many of us, we'll say, well, whenever I can meet somebody right? I mean, it's always time to date. Dating season is always open season. And that's kind of what our culture has taught us. It is always the right time to be in relationship because we should always be in relationship. But allow me to use the metaphor Solomon uses here in verse 11. He says to her, see, the winter is past. Metaphorically, what he's saying here is winter is this time of preparation. Winter is the time in preparation for springtime, when love is in the air. Winter is a time when we look around us and we look at nature and we see, it doesn't seem like there's any life, it doesn't seem like anything's happening, but in reality, during the winter, it's when plants and grass and trees, they're all sinking down their roots deep, preparing for new life in the spring. Winter is a time of preparation for the spring. And many of us, we find ourselves at times in the kind of relational season of winter. Many of us are there right now. We would say, you know what, as I look around me, I'm not in a relationship, doesn't look like anything is happening, doesn't look like there's any kind of life. And we could be honest about it. Many of us, when we're there, when we're in a time of preparation, whether in relationship or other time in our lives, we don't like it. We're an instant gratification kind of a culture. We want what we want, and we want it right now. We don't want to have to prepare for something that's going to be better. We get the sense that we're missing life if we're not constantly in a relationship. But winter is a necessary part of life if there is going to be a spring. How do we know when the winter is over and the spring has come, like this couple does? How do we know when it's time to move out of that time of winter or singleness and into a relationship? Is it just when we meet the right person? Or is it when we, hit a life stage like puberty, or, I graduate, or I get a job? Or is it when I just end the last relationship, that's when it's time to start the next relationship? I'd like to suggest 3 ways to use the winter period to your advantage if you find yourself in a season of winter now or in the future. And that these 3 marks really are also signs to let you know that it's time to move out of winter and perhaps to begin dating. All right? So here we go. Number 1, how do we know when winter is over? When you know what type of person that you want to marry and you're not willing to settle for anything less, chances are you may be ready to leave winter and enter into dating. I'm going to explain this through a story. Like I said, I've been able to watch some beautiful romances and love stories in my ministry and do some great weddings. And one couple is very early in my ministry. I was an intern actually in another church, and there was a young girl who attended our church named Kristen, and she was very committed to Jesus, and she knew what she wanted in a man. She was, in college or maybe just out of college, and she was ready to get serious about a relationship. She knew what she wanted in a man. And then there was Adam, who was gaga over Kristen, but Adam wasn't a follower of Jesus. And so he continued to ask Kristen out, and she continued to say no. And she didn't tell him why, but she's just like, no. But Adam was relentless. And so he started hanging around church, and he started talking to me. He wanted to know about Kristen. He asked questions about her. And then he wanted to know about Jesus, this guy who had stolen Kristen's heart. And he was actually genuinely just curious about spirituality. He had never grown up in a church or anything. And we ended up actually starting to get together, and I was discipling him. And he ended up falling in love with Jesus, and I remember the day of his baptism. It was an awesome day that he gave his life to Jesus. Soon after that, Kristen was like, okay, fine, I will date you. So they start dating, and after about 3 or 4 months of dating, she told him, before I met you, I put together a list of 50 characteristics that my future husband would have to meet. And you have met 47 of them. And she didn't tell him what any of them were. He was like, oh, wow, 3 more. After a year, she said to him, you have met all 50 characteristics of the man I want to marry. It was as if she was saying to him, you are the man for me, and I will not settle for anything less. Ask me to marry you. And he did. And they got married, and he became a pastor, and they lived happily ever after. It's a beautiful story, yeah. Oh, you should applaud that. That is an amazing story. I mean, so my question to you is, if during that time of winter, have you spent time really asking yourself, who is the person I'm going to marry? What are the characteristics? Not necessarily what do they look like, or what do they drive, or what kind of job do they make, what's their income. What characteristics do they have? What will be the man or the woman who will win my heart? Put together a picture of what that will be. It doesn't have to be 50. It could be 5. It could be 3. It could be 20. But put together those characteristics during the season of winter. Because if you don't, you're going to leave it to chemistry. And chemistry will lead you astray. You need to know ahead of time who it is you're going to be with for the rest of your life. Put it down on paper, share it with somebody, and don't settle for anything less. Second, when you are comfortable being single, rather than entering into a bad relationship, you are maybe ready to start dating. You're more comfortable in your singleness than you would want to be in a bad relationship. You know, before I could be in a healthy place where I'm going to be a blessing to someone else, I need to come to the place where I view my singleness, in even the season of winter, as a gift from God. That I come to the place where I view my singleness as a gift because I, in my singleness, am a complete person. I don't need someone else to complete me. I don't need a guy or a girl to complete me. I don't need a relationship to complete me. I am a complete person made in the image of God. I am comfortable in my singleness. I don't need someone else to complete me. This is one of the biggest pitfalls in our culture. And this is one of the things that people get into the most trouble with, that not only in high school, but also coming out of relationships, we don't take the time to get comfortable in our singleness. We don't take the time to heal emotionally and get comfortable being single. I talk to person after person, and again, this is just so prevalent. I'm out of a relationship. When can I start dating? I'm out of a relationship. When can I get married again? That people, really Christians now, the new norm for Christians is to be well into your dating life before your divorce is final. And I have to tell people, I'm sorry, that's not just unwise, that's sin. That's adultery. You're married. You cannot date while you're still emotionally attached and legally attached to another human being. I was recently talking with a friend, and this friend does not attend Newday, so I thought it was safe to share their story. But the person's spouse had recently left them after several years of marriage, and this person was just heartbroken. And I was there as a counselor and encouraging my friend, and I asked them, what is it you want? Because their spouse was in another relationship at the time. And I said, what is it you want? Well, I want my spouse back. I want things to work out. I'm ready to forgive. I want things to work out. I said, that's great. Well, let's pray for that. Well, before we pray, I just want to know, is it okay for me to date? And I wish I could say I was shocked, but I hear this so much. I want my marriage to work out, but can I enter into another relationship? I want this to work out. And I sometimes have to say to people, do you see how emotionally damaged you are right now? I mean, really, do you want to do this to somebody else? Do you want to do this to yourself? You need to take time to get healed, to become comfortable being single. That you don't need a relationship in order to complete you or to make you whole again. And again, most of us, our culture tells us if we're not in a relationship, we're missing life. And people will say, why should I put my life on hold in order to wait for something? Or your life isn't on hold if you're not in a relationship. Being single is being alive, really. It's okay. But it's because we haven't learned to be comfortable being single. And could it be because we start so young in our dating lives? That as soon as we hit junior high or high school, we just start, and we never learn what it's like to be single, because we just go from one relationship to the next, all the way through junior high, all the way through high school, all the way through college, always having to have somebody with us. And what I tell high schoolers all the time, and they don't like to hear it, but if you're going to date in high school, go ahead. I'm not saying it's a sin or anything, but 99% of the time, it's going to end bad. You just got to know that, right? We all know that intuitively. 99% of the time, it's going to end ugly, in tears and snot and crying on someone's shoulder and just awkwardness in the hallways and our friends, who's going with who. And I'm just going to tell you, it's either going to end in sexual frustration because you're not married, or it's going to end in sexual sin because you're not married, right? It's going to end bad. But if you want to do it, go ahead. Use the winter season to grow deep and prepare for what's next. Be comfortable in your singleness. The last thing I would say about the winter period, how to use it right, is when you're becoming the right person for your future spouse, then it's probably the right time to begin dating. We always think it's about meeting Mr. or Mrs. Right. I need to meet Mr. or Mrs. Once I meet Mr. or Mrs. Right, everything's going to work out because they're going to be Mr. or Mrs. Right. But it's not about meeting Mr. or Mrs. Right. It's about becoming Mr. or Mrs. Right. It's about becoming the kind of person that will attract the kind of person you want to be attracted to. And let me just tell you, I know we all are hungry for a love, well, not maybe all of us, but many of us are hungry for a love life, and we can have it anytime. One of the greatest ways that you can become the right person for your spouse and use the winter period is to run hard in your love life with Jesus. Is fall in love with Jesus. Because what it's going to take to have a relationship that lasts a lifetime is you're going to have to learn to love somebody when the emotions are there and the warm fuzzies are there and you're on the date and the candlelight, but also when you wake up with them and they have morning breath and their hair is all funny and they're in the worst mood ever. You're going to have to love them then too. And where are we being trained to love like that? I'll tell you, if you learn to love Jesus, you'll learn to love like that, because not only will he pour his grace into you, his unconditional love into you that will change you, but you're going to have to learn how to love him, not only in church or in the small group or the Christian concert where everyone's hands are up, but you're going to have to learn to love him when things are hard and you don't understand what he is doing in your life. You're going to have to learn to love him when things in your life aren't making any sense at all. And that kind of love life with Christ is the kind of love that prepares us for a romantic love that stands the test of time. So just think about this. Those of you who are single, I want you to imagine, if you plan on never getting married, that right now, somewhere out there is your future spouse. Just imagine them. That guy, that girl. Who are they? What are they doing right now? Hopefully they're in church. Hopefully they're not with some guy and he's like kissing her, or some girl who's like hanging all over him. Hopefully they're developing their character, getting ready for you. I want you to picture them and think about what they're like. And now think about what you need to do to become the person that will attract the person you hope to attract. Let me just speak a moment to those of you who may be married, and maybe this whole winter metaphor applies to you. Maybe you look at your marriage and you're like, you know what, we're in a season of winter right now. That doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of life in our marriage. It's winter right now, and it's hard right now. Maybe you'd even use that word lifeless. I would just encourage you to know that there are seasons in marriage as well, not just in life. And there are times of winter in marriage. There are times of spring and life in marriage. There are times of preparation. There are times of new life. Unfortunately, when many throw in the towel on marriage, it's during the season of winter, right? Because we don't know that spring is coming. We don't know that this is just a rough patch that we're hitting that's preparing us for something deeper and more beautiful. And so I would want to encourage you to hold on through winter. Ask a couple who's been married 30, 40, 50 years, have you ever encountered a season of winter in your life? And chances are they're going to tell you, oh, several. That there have been many seasons of winter, but winter is always followed by spring. It's a part of relationship. You don't throw in the towel during the winter. You see the purpose of winter. You learn to work through conflict. You learn to forgive and forgive again, just like Jesus forgives. You open up your life to those in group or other couples around you, and you say, help, we're having a hard time. Tell us how to do this better. Show us what we're doing wrong. Encourage us that we can make it through this. You learn to pray for God's healing and hope and restoration in your marriage. So I would just say, if you're there right now in that time of winter, know that spring is coming. If you just use that time of winter to become the person that your spouse deserves, rather than waiting for them to become the kind of person that you deserve, right? Work through the conflict, and it'll lead to a deeper season of life in the spring. So, all right, we know what to do with our winter. Now, what do we do once it's spring? All right, once we know, okay, I think I'm ready to start dating. How do we use the dating time to really date well in a God-honoring way? Look at what he says to her next. This is what he says. My dove in the cleft of the rock, in the hiding places on the mountainsides, show me your face. Let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet and your face is lovely. Catch for us the foxes, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards, our vineyards that are in bloom. So he addresses her in this season of dating. He says, come out, the winter is over, it's time for us to get to know one another. And he addresses her as a dove. And in the area where Solomon was writing, you'd have these doves that would hide in, they would build their nests in these cliffs and among the places where they would be protected from predators. And so he's using this as a metaphor for her. And he's saying, I want you to kind of come out from behind your protection, and I want you to show me who you really are. Let's get to know one another on a deeper level. Come out from the hiding, from behind that fear of rejection, or from the hurts of your past, or from your insecurities. And let's get to know one another, because we think we're serious here. See, they thought they knew each other during the attraction period, but they really didn't. They didn't know each other. You know, one writer said that your reputation is known in an hour, but your character does not come to light for a year, right? Now, I don't know that there's some kind of mathematical formula, but the point is that it really takes a long time to get to know someone's character. Kim and I always say, character always shows. You can't hide your character for too long, right? For a year, maybe, not much longer than that. Can you really hide who you are on the inside? And so this is one of the purposes of godly dating and the dating process. It's time to get to know the character of the other person more intimately, and then let them know who we are and let them see our character. And so let me just share with you two important things to be talking about during that period of dating. And the first thing you would want to talk about is you would want to talk about your past. This includes everything, like the family you grew up in, and things that were important to your family growing up, and things that you're hoping to bring into your family. You want to talk about things like the skeletons in your closet. How much debt do you have? Like, exactly. Like, what is your credit score? What am I marrying here? Right? If we go that far. What kind of scars have you picked up from your past relationships? Let's get it all out. I mean, does anyone have a contract out on your life that I need to know about? I mean, we want to know everything. And couples will say, how much do I need to know about somebody before I marry them? And I always say, you want to know enough so there's no surprises after you get married. You're not going to know everything, but you want to know enough so that you're like, what? And that's why Kim, like our first 5 or 10 years in marriage, every time I would like kind of start criticizing her over something, she'd be like, you knew I was like this before we got married. And she was right. You know, you're right. I knew it. And we worked through that. That was a winter period. All right. So more than that, we need to spend time talking about our future. What do you want in life? Where are you hoping to go in life? What are your dreams? What are your career aspirations? How many kids do you want? Where do you want to live? How will you discipline your kids? What kind of education will you give to your kids? What part will faith play in your marriage, in your life, in your home? Will there be family worship? What does that look like? I mean, you want to talk about what kind of future you want to see if there's compatibility. I do a lot of not a lot, but I do a fair amount. I won't marry anyone unless we do at least 7 sessions of premarital counseling. And that's not because I'm a great counselor. It's just because a lot of couples haven't talked through these things. And so we create space and we say, all right, let's talk about these things. Let's talk about your past. Let's talk about your future. Let's talk about all these different issues. And sometimes that really helps. And sometimes, well, it always helps. Earlier this year, I started doing counseling with a couple. And again, not part of Newday. And we had 1 session together, and they called me back afterwards that we decided not to get married. We started talking about things that you brought up that we never talked about before. We realized we are not a match. And I felt really bad, but I felt really good. I'm like, I think we averted disaster there because we were seeing some things that probably were going to come up later. So understand, all of this takes time. Dating takes time, and it should take time. Don't rush the process. Guard your heart as you go. Don't just too much too soon, right? So many of us, when we start dating and we're like, okay, I think this might be the guy, this might be the girl, we're like 2 weeks, and we're like, I love you. And you're like, oh, too much too soon. Don't rush the process. Just slow everything down, guard your heart, because if you give your heart away too soon, you're going to give everything away too soon, and then that's what leads to heartbreak and everything. Take your time, slow down, spend the time together to see what their character is like. How do they relate with their parents? How do they relate with the opposite sex? How do they handle pressure? How do they deal with stress? How do they deal with money? I mean, what happens when things don't go their way? How do they handle that? I believe this is what Solomon is saying when he says in that passage, he says, catch for us the foxes, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards are vineyards that are in bloom. What would happen is in the spring, these blossoms would come in the vineyards that would eventually create grapes. And these foxes would come and eat the blossoms before they become fruit. And he's saying, let's deal with the issues that can kill our relationship before it starts. And of course, this isn't something just for people dating, right? This is something that married people need to continue to do. We need to continue to date our spouses. We need to continue to talk about our past and our future together. We need to continue to work on the issues that could, ruin our relationship. We need to date one another. All right. Finally, we get to the area of desire and sexuality. We alluded to this last week if you were with us. We said anytime 2 people are attracted to each other and they talk to each other the way these 2 people talk to each other and encourage each other the way these 2 encourage each other, that naturally that's going to lead to desire. And that's what it does inevitably with this couple. And that's natural. Let me just say, again, we don't have to feel bad about desire. If all systems are go, then there will be desire, real desire, before you say I do. It's not like some switch that's supposed to be flipped on once you're married. Oh, now I want you. No, there will be desire before you say I do. But the question is, what do you do with that? What did this couple do with that? Well, several times in the book, like in chapter 2 and chapter 3, we see things really heating up. We don't know if they're together or they're just kind of thinking on their own, but things really start heating up. And each time things start heating up, the woman will say this. And I love this. This is great. She says this, daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you by the gazelles and by the does of the field, do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires. Or as other translations say, until the time is right. Do not arouse or awaken love before it is time. In other words, there is a time that is right and there is a time that it is not right. Obviously, this has to do with the value of purity and maintaining purity in the face of desire, maintaining purity during the dating process. She says, don't awaken love before it's time. That has many different applications, I think. But one of those things is that our desire is an appetite that is not easily satisfied. And it's like any other appetite that once you awaken it, it's hard to satisfy it. And I know a lot of young people say, you know what? I love my boyfriend, I love my girlfriend. We're just gonna go there once, and then it's gonna be over. But no, once you awaken that desire, it's over. I mean, it's very hard to go back. And that's what she's saying. Don't awaken love until the time is right. And in the biblical sense, that would be after marriage. That's what we're going to see for this couple. Once they get to when the time is right, then they go for it. But another thing, along with desire must come restraint. And she uses the gazelle and the doe as symbols of kind of love's passion. Gazelles and does. What do we know about gazelles and does? They're really jumpy animals. They're really easily startled. I mean, if you get too close to a gazelle or a doe and you move the wrong way, it's like, boom, up and running, right? It's just like, woo, we are gone. And that's what she's saying. Our sexuality is like that as well. If we get in the wrong situation, we get too close to that line, and the wrong thing happens, boom, off and running. And so that's why she's appealing to charging you by the gazelles and the does of the field. Do not arouse or awaken love until the time is right. We need to have it in the right order. And I just got to say, I think we know this. As a culture, we've gotten everything out of order. You know what happens again and again and again is we meet Mr. Right, Mr. Wrong, or Mr. Right or Mr. or Mrs. Right. Could be Mr. Wrong, we just don't know it. And there's chemistry. And so we're like, this is it. This is the guy. This is the girl. Everything they do is perfect. The little cleft in their chin, the way they laugh, the stories that they tell, they're so funny. I mean, this is the person for me. God designed this person for me. And we don't want to lose that because we think, well, this is Mr. Right. I got to take advantage of this. And so we open our hearts so soon, and we begin to become emotionally entwined with somebody so soon. And then when we open ourselves emotionally, the very next thing that we want to do is we want to offer ourselves physically. And that just complicates everything because now all it is about chemistry and hormones and physicality. And there's been no time at all invested in developing relationship or building trust or talking about commitment or where is this relationship going. No, nothing like that. Just all chemistry and hormones and physicality. And then after that goes for a while, then relational issues start cropping up because this is becoming a relationship, and there's conflict, but we don't have the foundation to be able to deal with that conflict because we never have dealt with the things like trust and getting to know one another in the proper order, and so we don't have the ability to really deal with that, and so pretty soon we're either tired of dealing with this or we're out of this, and so we kind of break up, and we leave a part of our heart on them, they leave a part of their heart on us because that's what sex is meant to do. It's meant to bind souls together. And then we kind of go through life like this, and we experience the heartache, and we experience the pain of breakup and the consequences that come with it. We do everything backwards. We get the sex first and the commitment second. But God intends for it to be very different, and this couple models the right way for us. They're attracted to each other, so they commit to date one another. Because they were both in a place where they were ready to start dating, and they saw godly character and godly conviction and godly encouragement in one another. They know there's chemistry, but they're not letting the chemistry take over. They're working on the relationship. Let's get to know one another. Then, when we're convinced we love one another for who the other person is and not for the sake of chemistry, then we commit to one another for life. And we get married, and then comes the sex and intimacy, which is built on the foundation of trust and love and commitment. Listen, purity is about so much more than just staying out of bed. Purity in relationship isn't just about staying out of bed, but it's about pursuing true love. It's about pursuing righteousness. Jesus said it like this. He said, "Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." That includes dating. I mean, this is the truth for everything as a follower of Jesus. It's all about trust. In the end, purity is about trust. You know, you could never really pursue purity without trust. Rules will not get you there. Rules will not get you to true purity. Only trust will. Trust in God. Do I believe that my Heavenly Father loves me more than any guy or girl ever could? Do I believe that my Heavenly Father actually wants something better for me than what I want for myself? Do I really believe that his plan for me could be better for me than my plan for me? Do I really believe that he wants to write my love story in a way that's going to have a happy ending, it's going to take me to a good place? Do I trust? Do I believe? Because if I don't trust him, none of this is going to work. It's all based on the foundation of trust. Eric and Leslie Ludy wrote a book called When God Writes Your Love Story. And in the book, they tell the story from Greek mythology, from Homer's Iliad, of two ship's captains. One was Odysseus. And Odysseus is one of the stars of the book, right? He tells a story that he's out on a ship and he's this captain that knows what to do. He's very confident. And he and his crew are out on the ship and they're coming up on an island when all of a sudden he hears something that makes him lose all of his confidence. It's the song of the siren mermaids in the rocks around the island that sing out their alluring song that leads all sailors astray, calls them into the rocks where their ships will be dashed on the rocks and all the sailors will lose their lives. Well, Odysseus knows the danger of the sirens, and he calls his men together, and he says, men, today is not the day that our ship is going to be shipwrecked. We're going to, outsmart these sirens. And so he has all of the men put beeswax in their ears, and he says, but I want to hear the song. And so I want you to tie me to the mast of the ship as tight as you can, and I want you to put beeswax in your ears, and no matter what I say, no matter what I do, don't untie me. And so they do it. And so they all put the beeswax in their ears, and they go closer to the shore, and the song of the siren starts to sing out, and the sailors are all oblivious to it because they can't hear it. But Odysseus can hear it, and he is just so allured by it, and he starts begging the men, untie me, I have to go to it. And he's getting rope burns as he's trying to free himself, but they ignore him as he ordered them to do. And finally, they get far enough away from the shore where they can't hear the song anymore, and so they all take the beeswax out of their ear, and they untie Odysseus. But he says, why? Why does it seem like the things I desire must lead to my destruction? Why must I be restrained from something so beautiful? This is the way of the rope burn. This is the way of all of us who try and do it based on rules, who say, I'm going to remain pure, I can do this. But there is another way. And Orpheus, the second captain that comes along, had that other way. Orpheus was another captain who was wise and knew what to do, and he knew what to do with the sirens. And actually, as they got close to the islands, all of the sailors were excited because this was their favorite part of the journey. Rather than breaking out beeswax, they bring him a box, and they open the box where he pulls out an instrument, because Orpheus was an amazing musician. And Orpheus begins to play this song that was so beautiful and so alluring that none of the sailors even paid attention to the song of the sirens. Their captain played a sweeter song than the song that would lead to their destruction. And listen, our culture has been providing the song for dating. We have bought in, and many have been shipwrecked. But God is the great lover of our souls, and he's trying to woo us with another song, a sweeter song, one that will drown out the songs that lead to painful heartbreak and shipwreck. And we may say, well, that's just so unrealistic. I mean, yeah, okay, that sounds great in church, but out there, it just seems so unrealistic in this culture to try and live a life of dating in a pure way where I'm pursuing Jesus. And you know what? It may be unrealistic. But I also think it's very unrealistic that God would so love us that he would be willing to become a human. But that's exactly what he did. And I think it's also incredibly unrealistic to think that God as a human would live for 33 years on our planet without sinning once. But that's exactly what Jesus did. And I think it's incredibly unrealistic to think that he, the perfect God, would take my sin and put it on himself and take it to a cross where he would hang there paying my penalty. But that is exactly what Jesus did. Yes, it's probably unrealistic to think a man and a woman could seek righteousness in their romantic relationships, but we have a great example in Christ. And we have a great motive in Christ. And we have a great lover in Christ. He has shown us the way, and he will walk with us every step. And for those of us here in the room who say, wow, I blew it. As I look at my life, I have blown it. I blew it many times. Then the lover of your soul is willing to also forgive. For those of us who are dealing with scars and consequences and guilt and shame, he says, I will forgive. I'm not going to stop loving. You may have consequences to deal with, but I'm going to continue to love you, and your consequences with me are paid for because Jesus paid for it. But he's going to continue to play that sweeter song and seek to woo all of us to the better way.